It's really uplifting, expansive, and not bad vocals.
Not bad.
So, many of you were here on Wednesday when we had the talk and discussion about paganism. Well, thanks for being here. I appreciate that. In that talk, we also discussed the role shamans play in the past, the misconceptions about what it is, and how that carries into the present. So most of us can recognize the power that shamans had over their entire communities, their bands, their tribes. And yeah, as you know, I like to call this the tribe of Circle's Edge. Not because of paganism or shamanism, just because it's fun. So in the past, shamans worked with gods and goddesses that either supplied them with abundance or lack. Hunting was either good or it wasn't good. Crops either flourished or they didn't. They withered, they died on the vine, depending on weather conditions, rain, frost, all the things we experience at Green Acres in northern Nevada. Well, my question is that how people really prayed for and experienced their abundance or lack? True shamans? Maybe. Let's take a look at that. So, I always turn to other authors, writers for guidance, and on this, I turned to Joel S. Goldsmith. Many of you know his works. And of course, I wasn't disappointed. Goldsmith has a book called Our Spiritual Resources. And in it, he addresses the issues of abundance and lack much more eloquently than I can. So I'll give you a few quotes today from Joel S. Goldsmith. Here's the first one. God is pouring itself forth and expressing itself as harmonious being and as a harmonious universe. The world, however, is not enjoying the harmony of that universe, or the it is not at this moment doing itself for everybody. Whether or not all the everybody's avail themselves of what God is giving them so freely. Now he wrote 30s, 40s, and into the 50s. So the language is a little stilted. And he uses God a lot when I like to say spirit or something else. So let me ask you, following up with that, do you believe that spirit is withholding anything from you today?
No.
Who said that? Good. Right, Leah. Do you believe there is a God who can give you anything, but right now has decided to withhold something, anything from you?
No.
Yes.
Yes, no.
Right. Right, no.
Yes.
Thank you. So, do you believe there's a way you can reach out to that God that you think is withholding something and have him go, okay, I'll release that right now. Here it comes. Is that your version of God? Of spirit? That he chooses to withhold something from any individual? Well, I'm studying world religions, and most of the religions in this world are based on that very concept. That we have to find a way to influence spirit, to convince spirit that it's time to act on our behalf. Let's make a deal. Is that what you believe? No. I know Leah doesn't. Have you been successful in the past making deals with God?
No.
Sometimes even those beseeching, pleading prayers are answered. Sometimes, but it's not what you think. didn't make a deal with God, did you offer him a good enough deal? Even to bribe God to give you, to release what you think you need? That's not consistent with our teaching. Our teaching is based on the idea that Spirit is omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient. That God does not, cannot withhold anything from anyone, anytime. Now think about what that means. We've been talking for the past months, occasionally, frequently, about the steps of spiritual mind treatments. And one of those big steps is release. Release. Right now, I ask you, I invite you to release any illusion, any belief that God withholds anything from anyone, anywhere, anytime. God doesn't give something to one race that it doesn't give to every race. He doesn't give anything to one church that he doesn't give to every church or any religion. Here's another Goldsmith quote about this. There's no greater truth in all Scripture than that his rain falls alike on the just and the unjust. Once you begin to perceive that God is no respecter of persons, the inner release which comes from that recognition will break down any form of bias, bigotry, race or religious prejudice, economic or social prejudice, which you may have been entertaining, end quote. We know that for quite a long time, the sun rises and sets on a schedule. And we can calculate that. There are tables that have sunset, sunrise calculated hundreds of years into the future. The tides rise and fall on schedule. The seasons come and go. And yet no one is praying to God to vary that schedule to accommodate their social calendar. We have a sports event. Can you just keep sunrise for another 2 hours? We just know. Intuitively, that prayer wouldn't be answered. So here is the most important part or point that I want to make today. God's grace operates because of God, not because of man, which implies not because of prayer. God's grace is what it is. And we know, we probably have friends or have seen someone. Many a religious person has lost faith. They started with deep convictions and faith and they lost it over time. Because they've been praying to God for years and their prayers weren't answered. We already said God's grace is omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient. But here's something it's not. It is not personal. Goldsmith said God is no respecter of persons. God's function is to fulfill itself. And since nothing is being withheld, nothing can ever be added to or for us. That really has an interesting implication. Nothing is being withheld, so nothing can be added to us. So what would we be asking for in prayer? Here's another Goldsmith quote. God's grace is my sufficiency in all things. God's grace does not have to be won, earned, or deserved. God's grace is flowing as freely in the experience of this world as it is in the rising and setting of the sun, the ebb and flow of the tides. and orderly movement of all the planets in the cosmos. God's grace is free and present everywhere. The place whereon I and each of you stand is holy ground, because God's grace is here. And that grace would be here even if each of us were the world's greatest sinners. Now, we don't even really use the term sin, but this is a quote, so we'll let that go. Still quote, "My realization of this truth would immediately begin wiping out any sin and the penalties for such sin, none of which God has brought upon me, but all of which I brought upon myself by living a life apart from the recognition of God's grace." You remember, it was written in the 30s, 40s, 50s. There's a lot of God. Some people get uncomfortable with that, some don't. I like terms spirit, universe, consciousness, love. You could come up with thousands of words. So everything he said is true in our universe, our world, but it also is true in our personal lives, especially in our relationships. Whenever we look to someone else for our good, for favors, for influence, we actually shut ourselves off from the source of our supply. Now, I'm pretty much guilty every day. Susan, can you do this? Can you do that? But I have to remind myself, Susan's not the source of my good. There's one source. When we believe someone else is that source, or anything comes from that source, we shut down our supply because we lost faith, we lost connection in our true source. And I can tell you this from experience. When we build that kind of a needy relationship, that person intuitively senses that, feels that. Up come the walls. They don't want to be used. They don't want their energy to be burned up by someone else who's needy. They want to protect themselves. And that relationship has destroyed more budding relationships than anything I've ever seen. When you have your faith, your connection to infinite source, spirit, you're not relying on someone else. Then you can have a really good, healthy, spiritual relationship. So turn to your one and only true source for that good. But not by begging or directing spirit, because spirit won't respond, can't respond. Spirit's not withholding any good from you. In our teaching, we're a little short on mandates like thou shalt or thou shalt not. It's not part of who we are. We don't try to control each other. We don't try to control each other's spiritual beliefs. That's what allows us to have a relationship as a spiritual community and build these beautiful bonds that we have. I love Sunday mornings because of the spiritual community. The tribe comes together without conflict, without need from each other. Because we're open at the top. Yet when you understand you can't ask God for anything, you can't convince God of anything, or give advice to God, then our meditations, our prayers change instantly. It enables us to return to spiritual communication, spiritual relationship, and in this word, God's grace. So I would ask you to take a self-assessment. of your attitude towards and your concept of spirit. When you sit down to pray or meditate, are you asking spirit for something? Are you asking, hit that lever, release that, jackpot? Is that what you're doing? Trying to direct, command, bargain, deal with spirit? If you can accept what I'm telling you as your truth, and we all have our own truth, then you know that old way of doing things is not part of our teaching. There is, however, one simple, easy prayer that always puts us back in spiritual alignment. And I've said it before. That prayer is, thy will be done. You're not directing spirit, you're relying on spirit to do what it does and allow itself to be in your life, to flow. When you can say that prayer, thy will be done, with meaning and intention, then you are ready to experience that wonderful inner communion with spirit. Okay, one final Goldsmith quote. Where thou art, I am. Where I am, thou art. In a rubber boat on the ocean, lost in the desert, up in a plane, or down in a submarine. Where I am, thou art. My consciousness is filled with the living presence of thee, Almighty God. I cannot invoke thy power. I cannot make it operative in my experience, and I cannot stop its activity. But I can avail myself of its blessing by this acknowledgement. So what he's saying is, by consciously knowing this truth, it becomes active in our experience. We see all the other members of our spiritual community practicing at this various levels, bringing this into their consciousness. If we don't know this truth, it is as if we were cut off from this source, from this consciousness. It's not operative in our worlds unless we can manifest it, we can express it, we can simply allow it to be in our lives. Once you stop trying to get God to do something for you, you'll then come into the benefit of spirit, the presence, which you can never be separated from anyway. When we're doing our healing work, we don't turn to spirit to do healing for us, for our patient. We do turn to spirit as through our spiritual mind treatment to release God's presence into this experience, into this reality. God's power, God's infinite wisdom is always there. All we're doing is releasing the blockage, the appearance of something else, the belief of separation. The truth releases false impressions, false appearances, quickly and easily. It is God's good pleasure to give us the kingdom. Once we know we can't be separated from this source, we should be able to pray in great confidence, thy will be done. And you can elaborate on that. There's lots of ways to say, thy will be done. A lot of us have read Eric Butterworth's book, Spiritual Economics. In that he says, there's a great need to establish ourselves in the omnipresence of universal substance. Universal substance is just one more way to say spirit, God, consciousness. He says, you are part of the source. with all the power of Source to create galaxies. You choose some limitations as part of the game, but your power remains unlimited. The source of all creation is pure consciousness, pure potentiality seeking expression from the unmanifest to the manifest. Now let me repeat that. The source of all creation is pure consciousness, pure potentiality seeking expression from the unmanifest to the manifest. That is not just a spiritual statement, that's quantum physics. Anyone who studied quantum physics knows there's an infinite number of potentialities, and the observer creates one of those realities, and all the other potentialities are gone. Quantum physics. Quantum scientists have been studying this and proving all of this. So when we realize that our true self is one of pure potentiality, we align with the power that manifests everything in the universe. Quantum physics. But in this case, it was from Deepak Chopra in the 7 Spiritual Laws of Success. When you are aware of experiencing something in your life, when you become aware of something, you are creating it. If you're experiencing something in your life you want to change, choose differently. You are powerful. You create more of what you want by appreciating what you like. You create more of what you want by expecting it. Whatever you plant in your mind, you will eventually manifest in the outside world. Here's a quote from Florence Scovel Shinn. It's like planting an apple tree. You find rich, fertile soil. You choose which apple seed to plant. You give it ample amounts of light and water, and eventually you have an apple tree with apples. Your mind is the rich soil. Your thoughts are the seeds. Your action is the water. Your feelings and intention is the light or the sun. Most people don't get what they want because they're trained to think about what they don't want. That's when the weeds come up in your fertile soil. Did you plant the weeds? Well, negative thoughts sprout and grow. We all still have them, but you have to recognize them. Pull those weeds, pull those thoughts, or release them. Stop watering the weeds. We're obsessed with drama in our lives, and negative thoughts pop up. That's humanity, that's life. But we're spiritual beings. We can find a better way. She finishes her quote with, "The game of life is the game of boomerangs. Our thoughts, deeds, and words return to us sooner or later with astounding accuracy." In Vegas, I learned a saying down there. We no longer have the luxury of a negative thought, because as we raise our consciousness, our vibration, those negative thoughts become weeds and they really grow quickly. So we don't have the luxury of a negative thought. Recognize it, release it. There's nothing you can't do or have or be. Nothing you can't change. It's no use to desire a thing unless you expect to get it, either in part or in full. Desire without expectation is idle wishing or dreaming. You simply waste much valuable mental energy in doing this. Desire will put you in touch with the inner world of causes and connection. Connect you by invisible means with the substance of the thing desired. Then continuous expectation is necessary to bring it into a reality in your life. Now that has and some of this has a little different twist than what I started with, that we don't ask God for anything. We don't make deals with God. But it is God's great joy to give us everything we need. God will give us an average of what we think about. We can change that average. Our thoughts, our beliefs, our power. When we can hold a positive thought, a positive belief, Spirit responds to that. There's no such thing as a vacuum, even in spirit. So if you want to take control of your life, change your thinking, change your thoughts, be affirmative, be positive. There's a power in the universe greater than you are, greater than I am, greater than any of us. And we can use it. It's something we can use in everyday life. When the greatest teacher that ever lived said, "It is done unto you as you believe," what do you think he was talking about? He was talking about a power that is close to us, nearer than hands and feet. How would you like to use that power? Certainly, we have the ability to use it in an intimate way. But we have to believe that power exists and that the power isn't limited. The power isn't withheld. We believe tomorrow will come. It does. We believe the sun will rise in the morning and set in the night. That's all on schedule. We believe the grass will grow. We believe our food will digest. When we believe that with faith, then we can use that power creatively. Now, prior to the digital age, we used to have a saying, seeing is believing. Well, it kind of changed in the digital age because digital images can be quickly changed and manipulated. But still, if we see something other than a photograph, we believe it, usually. Well, now we can say that believing is seeing. When you believe it, you will see it. And don't say, I believe it coming down the road. I believe it's here now. That's when it'll manifest. Until you can believe it, you're not going to see it. But when you do believe it, miracles are possible. Now, as usual, I underestimated how much I like to do side trips and talk here. So I'm going to skip a lot of this stuff. I started the talk today mentioning the role shamans played in ancient peoples appealing to gods and goddesses as everything. The animals, each one was a god spirit. The plants, each one had a god or goddess spirit. The mineral kingdom had a god or goddess spirit. It occurs to me, as I was preparing this talk, that the shamans, the good ones, had already gotten past this. They weren't asking God for a good hunt. They weren't asking God for good weather, for great harvest. They already knew that's God's work. And all they had to do was align their consciousness, their beliefs. They knew they had the power. We know shamanism has existed for 35,000 years minimum. The cave art found in Germany is 35,000 years old with pictures of shamans. Things don't survive that long unless they have some practical benefit. So my personal belief is that shamans learned these truths. They weren't making deals with the gods and goddesses. They were recognizing this is what is. Spirit already wants to give us these things. Share the harvest, the bounty. Share the animals. That's why they're here. They had to know that Spirit would provide everything they needed and more. That was the secret. That was the difference between the typical tribe member and the shaman. They learned this at a young age, or began to learn it at a young age. My shaman in the Amazon apprenticed when he was 12. He was in his 70s, and he said he was still learning. But Spirit gives us our good and more good, which coincidentally is the topic, I think, of Liza's talk next week. Something good, more good?
No, I was gonna talk on faith, but I can do
Oh.
good and more good.
We'll save it. You do what you had planned. It's all good. It's all good and more good. So, well, with that, I will say namaste.
Namaste.